ねえダーリン、僕たちこれからはずっと一緒だよね。
ずっと。
Welcome to the Not Quite Daily Show. We have rolled over to the spring season of 2018, but we will be continuing Darling in the Franxx, now at episode 13. I suspect this episode won over a lot of people on the fence about the show. Despite it being full of new information and characterizations, so much of it felt familiar and appropriate for the world and characters as we understand them. We can now look back at the last few episodes and see that they were structured specifically to set up this whole episode flashback. This episode, combined with 12, felt very much like episodes 5 and 6, even the part where they skipped the opening credits to keep from disrupting the mood. Due to the majority of today's episode being out of sync chronologically from the rest of the series, my show itself will be slightly different. There is no goal or conflict progress, really, so we won't have those sections. There are some potential additions, but I'll touch on that later. There is a regrettable complication as well. This episode really deserved an extra day for me to work on. It really deserves a carefully refined treatment. It was the biggest moment in the series so far, and it should get the best that I can give it. Unfortunately, I not only don't have that extra day, I have one less day than normal this week. My alter ego has to go out of town. Worst possible timing, I know, but it can't be helped. That is why there are greatly simplified boards today. We also will not have a what to watch for section, and no striking from that list or the speculation list either, even though we have some things that qualify. We'll catch it up next time. I have to do what I can to get this video out, focusing on the things I think most important. It will likely be rougher in editing than normal as well, but alas. Finally, I actually want to begin today by touching on the numerous speculations from my last episode. There was something very important that I missed, and it changed how I would have approached things. I guess it's because of the original voiceover in the show's opening moments, but I had not assumed that the young, red-skinned Zero-Two was non-verbal. Her inability to speak and being largely unable to understand speech really alters how this played out compared to what I expected. But it raises a question that I brought up last time, and a question I want us to keep in mind throughout today's examination. That question is, did Zero-Two recognize Hiro before now or not? I mentioned some of her inconsistency last time, but I talked about it a lot more in the comment section. There are moments when it seems she must recognize him, mostly contained in all the evidence I gave last time for the idea that they've met before, but the hardest thing to account for is her behavior lately. She withdrew from him like we'd assumed, but to ramp it up the way she did last episode? She completely dismissed his love confession, and then she actively tried to drain him in pursuit of someone else. And for that someone else to be stated as her darling from back then, doesn't that blatantly mean that Hiro is not that person? Indeed, the way today's episode begins and ends supports this idea, that the current Zero-Two does not link Hiro with his past self until he remembers the picture book. I do have a working theory on why this may be. I will share it with you in speculation, but I will be pointing out a few parallels that support the idea throughout our walkthrough. So, let's get that started. The episode begins with alarm klaxons blaring and Nana warning that our main character's consciousness may merge. Apparently that's bad, but it's a good thing it happens, because otherwise we wouldn't get the story of a monster. Now, I had the hardest part getting the first section of this written, because I kept wanting to just let the episode play this opening bit. It was so good. We have a return to letting Zero-Two narrate, something that hasn't happened since the first moments of the show. We will revisit the show's opening a little later in this episode, because we have new context for it. As in that opening, she and Hiro take turns at speaking directly to the audience and to themselves, and they are once again speaking about the same subject from two different points of view. This time, however, each narration is intercut with the other, turning it from a pair of monologues into something more like a conversation. I found it surprisingly intimate, and the immediate contrast with the frantic sirens and the close-up views in the cockpit makes the use of space and silence all the more stark. Superimposing current Hiro into these first few memories also drives home for us that he is a visitor to these events, a spectator, both in her past and in his own. He gets the unique experience of watching the events unfold from both points of view. Not only does this mean he gets to be reminded of who he was back when everyone looked up to him, but he gets all the more reason to empathize with Zero Two and her plight. This empathy and understanding is something he may very well need in the days ahead. Throughout these flashbacks, there are these video distortion transition effects. They will later appear to be some artifact of what was done to the kids, confirming our suspicion that Hiro's memory was tampered with. The way they reduce and space out over the course of this episode may be representative of the memories coming back to him, allowing him to remember in full once he reaches the end. As to the actual scenes, we start by having each of them describe their parallel plights, their closed worlds. Colors and details are washed out of both scenes while they are apart, and yet they cleverly show snow falling in each. Hiro is standing out in it, while Zero Two is framed by its shadow. He stands out in the light, and she hides in the dark. Yet when they are together in the next scene, both are full of color and detail, and Hiro is leading her outside into the brightness. Remember last time I pointed out that snow means love. This part where they are just about to leave their closed worlds begins by focusing on the shadow of snow and pans up to each of them preparing to escape into the real thing. And we get them speaking in tandem to accompany it, and the promise we made. Remember this part when we get to that promise. Just before this, we also get a single descriptor from each about what they remember or should have remembered from that day. For her, it was how vast the sky was, and for him, it was how warm her hand was. Freedom and companionship, no? Aren't those just the two things that the current version of these two have been striving for, have been trying to find with each other? But they haven't been able to, because this is a story forgotten. We then go further back, and each of them presents their own backstory, starting with Zero Two. We see the image of the ripped stuffed animals from last time, and her face reflected in one of their glass eyes. She informs us that she never wondered about who she was back then. This is the opposite of her current self, who is practically obsessed with who or what she is. We then see the true state of her living situation. Man, humans are the worst. She gives us interesting information on her own memories, that she can't remember anything before being trapped in that room, but she felt like she should have older memories, even though she's forgotten them. Let's look at her room for a second. It doesn't look like it was meant to hold something like a wild animal, does it? It's a nursery, and one way more human than anything we see the parasites grow up in, even though they are actual humans. Do you think maybe this is an older part of the facility, before they changed to the sterile environments they use now? Or is there something more singular about Zero Two? That she's related in some way to someone important? There's no guessing now, so let's instead look at how the room may have informed her. Everything about the decor is meant to emulate sky. There's clouds and wind on the walls, stars on the ceiling, a disk of sun, and even birds suspended as though in flight. Small wonder that the vastness of the sky outside made such an impression on her. Small wonder how important the idea of having wings will be to her. Next, we have the mysterious blue woman who brings Zero Two food, and later the picture book. Zero Two herself guesses that she's a stand-in for a mother, so a type of caretaker, perhaps? I'm guessing she is blue and indistinct like this because of the fuzziness of memory, not because she was actually glowing blue with no mouth. It's a simplification of detail, basically, much like the blacked-in faces we see of the other parasites in some of Hiro's memories. What is interesting is the details that do get included. She has odd protrusions on her shoulders and back, and these are asymmetrical. She also has pointed nails, claw-like, just like Zero Two's. Considering the head padding and the later gift of the book, there is strong implication of affection for Zero Two from this person, or at least some kind of empathy, and the only such example Zero Two is shown until she meets Hiro. Since the only details included are ones that distinguish her from a normal human silhouette, shouldn't we conclude that this mother stand-in is not quite human herself? I don't know if this means she's literally Zero Two's mother, even if just in a surrogate sense, or if this is a person who is another test subject like Zero Two. But I do feel some kind of abnormality is implied, as well as some connection to 02. For now, it'll just have to stay a mystery. The last thing this mysterious caretaker does for 02 is bring her a picture book, something 02 doesn't really understand at first. I actually wonder about cause and effect here. Did this person know that this was the last time, hence bringing her a parting gift? Or was the gift a type of contraband, resulting in her being forbidden from making contact again? I'm not sure this is the type of thing we even need to have explained, though we may find out if we ever learn more about 02 before her memories began. The part that really matters is that this person showed 02 kindness and gave her a gift, the first example of each of these things in her world. This is what sets Hiro up at all to reach her in the future. We'll dive into the book itself later on at length. It's actually going to have its own section. Just notice for now the back of it, the feather that shifts from blue to red. Blue and red aren't just the different colors of blood between her and Hiro, but they also are the colors associated with each of them, albeit in an opposite manner from their blood color, which is interesting in its own right. 02's part then ends as she reflects on the book as her first pretty thing, and her belief that the outside world may hold many more such things. She says she was half right and half wrong. I guess the implication is that, yes, the world does have pretty things in it, but it's also full of ugly things, and one of those ugly things is everything that is about to happen to her. I think this is also the last time she's in this room. They swap narrating duties, and we begin to see Hiro's backstory. He begins the same as her, asking, "Who am I?" But unlike her, he says that question was all he ever had on his mind. This is the first indication of his curiosity, something we will soon discover was a defining feature of his younger self, an odd contrast to his current self, just as 02's lack of curiosity about herself is a contrast to her current self. We get a montage of the parasite's daily lives and training, and the indication that code numbers represent parasite potential. Still no information on how they are first assigned, though. Low numbers also correlate with special treatment, and it is just this specialness that has caused Ichigo to have a bit of a crisis. She's worried about being different because the rest of their fellow parasites have stopped being happy or mad or sad. They've stopped feeling entirely, it seems, but Ichigo has not. She wants to feel nothing like they do, not because she wants to feel nothing, but because she doesn't want to be different. Hiro says they were already different by virtue of being teen codes. He has already made peace with being different, in that he doesn't feel scared by it or feel the need to not be different. He's curious and introspective, but has no crisis of identity, not like Ichigo is having. If his expression of this is anything to go by, he is not jealous of the other's lack of emotion, but rather worried by it. He definitely wouldn't support Ichigo wanting to become more like them. Thus, he makes a suggestion, probably without knowing how important it will be. He asks Ichigo if she wants a name. What I find kind of fascinating is that he got the idea of having a name from books, from stories. As repressed and controlled and ignorant as the society attempts to keep the children, it's kind of odd that they let them read whatever they want. Hiro gets the idea for the humanizing act of naming from books, and 02 will end up getting her motivation from her one book as well. 02's clear memories actually seem to start from the time of receiving the book, letting her remember it and that room in perfect detail, but only vaguely remembering the caretaker and whatever came before. They also will both hold a special place in their hearts for the Jinbird story, and we just had the series reference The Golden Bow last time, a book that is more or less about the origin of stories. Should we conclude that the importance of stories is also a thematic element to this work? That stories are humanizing just like names? I'll think about that idea, and we'll explore it next time, depending on how the current crisis plays out. We do know that we have power of names going on, and Hiro almost accidentally includes Ichigo by suggesting he give her a name like he's given himself. If she also has a name, then she can be just like someone else. She can be like Hiro, and yet still retain her uniqueness. It's inclusive while also being distinctive. As he says, having a name can make you feel like it's okay to be different because it's a unique name that exists for you alone. What I was surprised about in this scene is that it's Ichigo's idea to give names to everyone else. Maybe she's always had good leadership instincts. The names have the desired effect. Desired by the children, that is, as we have some of their handlers rush in to try to stop them changing their designation. They ignore Hiro's question of why, but they also back off a bit once realizing he is a teen code. Although I'm sure the workers have absolute authority over the children, there is a little bit of a taboo about pushing too hard against the lower numbers, and Hiro already noted that they get special treatment. It reminds me a bit of religious reverence. I've noted before that sometimes the parasites seem to be treated like they are partially sacred, despite being disposable. That, too, is an idea that I picked up from the Golden Bow. It's a behavior that crops up particularly around people who are slated to be sacrifices one day, whether they were the priest-king at the top, a caste of servants that tended directly to the king, or even those who had no status apart from being chosen for ritualistic death. A fundamental aspect of something being sacred is that it exists apart from the everyday, and there seems to be some fear of weakening whatever purpose the sacred serves by bringing it into too much contact with the mundane. I know it seems like I'm extrapolating a lot from just this scene, but it's not just this scene. All over the series, we have the parasites being treated like things with no real autonomy or decision-making power, and yet they are praised and lauded and sometimes served like royalty. That's a relatively unique pattern, but like I said, it has precedent in human rituals and mythology, and since they threw down a direct Golden Bow reference, I feel like this sort of illusion is on the table. Well, we won't get answers now, because not even Hiro can get straight answers from the adults in the society. He notes, though, that he seems to be the only one asking questions. Life goes on, though, and we know that they ended up being able to keep their names. We get another reminder of the children disappearing from Garden without warning, as well as another montage of training as Hiro moves into being a special research subject. He is given candy for his trouble, but no answers. Due to being in the lab, though, he is in position to witness a fateful scene. Young 02 being dragged out of the nursery room where she has been sequestered. Now, I don't know if it actually matters, but I do want to note that unlike the caretaker adults that we see around the human children, all of the ones in the lab are wearing filters or breathing apparatus over their mouths and noses. In an experimental lab room, we see a familiar face, Dr. Franxx. He doesn't really look much younger. He is exulting over 02, and from his words, it appears that this is the first time he's seen her, or at least the first time since she has gone through some kind of changes. 02 is leagues better than their past specimens, but what's most interesting is his statement that he can't believe she has developed such a human form. What? We were informed by Nana way back in episode 1 that 02 is a girl that carries Klaxosaur blood. Even though we saw that a much less human-looking version of her existed, the implications seem to be some kind of cross between Klaxosaurs and humans, or at least some kind of addition of Klaxosaur attributes to a human girl. His statement here, though, seems to imply that she's a Klaxosaur originally, and they've done something to make her more human-like, not the other way around. Expressing disbelief at how human-like she is means all the other past specimens were far away from being human. Or, at the least, if they are some kind of hybrid synthetic creature, the rest seem to grow into something much more consistent with their monstrous roots. At the very least, she is not treated as though she's human. Not that the children are treated that great either, but I doubt any of them is being shot through with holes. No one seems particularly bothered by this. Indeed, Dr. Franxx is downright fascinated by her body's ability to rapidly heal itself. His reaction and his complicitness to this treatment does not make him very sympathetic. Yet his behavior is very in line with the mad scientist archetype that we associated with him way back at the beginning. He's completely indifferent to the morality of what's done or pain caused, but is emotionally responsive to whatever seems like fascinating data. And if she is part Klaxosaur, maybe even originally Klaxosaur, then how much empathy should he demonstrate to their mortal enemy exactly? We don't know what's in his past either. Of course, we in the audience do not share his perspective. In fact, we are deliberately meant to be bothered by this terrible display, further distancing ourselves from the adult society and those who control it. We have seen her humanity, her confusion, and her naive innocence. We long for someone to free her from this. We may even long for someone to exact vengeance. Who shall we put our hopes in? Hiro wants answers yet again, his curiosity being something they can't quite suppress. They attempt to stonewall him, but this version of Hiro is not the most compliant of children, and he sets out to find the answer himself. Not without some difficulty, but given what we know of Hiro, we should have guessed that he would have resolve in plenty. And he gets his chance one day as he notices a commotion in an upper-level window. Risking the great height, Hiro positions himself to see a pitched battle between 02 and some attendant that is attempting to separate her from her book. 02 cares way more about keeping it than the attendant does about taking it, and so 02 wins, clutching the book to herself as though it were the most precious thing in the world, her treasure. And Hiro, seeing this, smiles. Heck, he blushes. We know that he's a voracious reader. Is it possible that the initial spark for him is seeing her efforts to protect a single book? That this was the very beginning of being drawn toward her as a person rather than an object of curiosity? We even have a glowing feather descend on the scene from somewhere, right as he's trying to explain that seeing her in the book made him really, really happy. Do you think that this white feather is meant to recall the Jinn bird and the love pair it foreshadows? Here, white and aglow, drifting down through snowfall? We cut next to the full scene of Mitsuru and Hiro's promise about piloting together. Now that we know it is sandwiched between Hiro's memories of 02, it makes sense that it would have been collateral damage to the later adjustments to his memory. There's really nothing else to add here. We've talked about all this before. Afterwards, we get another example of the children mysteriously disappearing from garden. We see that this is a source of stress for the children. It gets them wondering if they will be next. They even seem to know that it's ominous. Papa threw them away, one of them says. It casts a pall over their mood. Hiro can only think that they have to do something, but Goro and Ichigo are there for his reality check. Papa and the others decided this. There's nothing they can do. The children know they are powerless and not in charge of their own destiny, but Hiro refuses to accept this. This discontent of his is building, the frustration of being without power, without answers. His pronounced sensitivity causes him not to shrink from others out of fear of loss, but to take worry upon himself for their sake, to want to do something for them, even if it's just asking everything he can think to ask. And his sensitivity is a problem for his caretakers, who fear it may influence the others. But it seems it is Dr. Franxx who intervenes, to the surprise of the other adults. He says that he's very interested in what kind of parasite a child like him will grow up to be. This gives a little extra subtext to the things he said to Hiro back in episode 7. He may have had his eye on Hiro for a long, long time. Thus, they don't interfere, and so Hiro is still his empathetic self one day when he hears terrible screams. He's horrified at what he sees being done to the girl with horns. But when the adult blows him off and tells him it's none of his business, a line has been crossed. Hiro walks through the snow, embroiled by questions, and chief among them, though, is why can't he get any answers? And why is no one else asking questions? These two thoughts together no doubt convince Hiro that it is up to him alone to do something. No one else is even curious, and so he turns back to face the lab. And now we come to the payoff. Alone and lonesome, one full of questions with no answers, the other full of pain with no relief. They're children and they don't understand, but no one else is going to understand it for them. I think it is really important that they don't meet by accident, that Hiro is already aware of her and has to take action, drastic action, in order for them to come together. That kind of proactive effort towards helping another, towards helping yourself, is the hallmark of strong protagonists. It's something he has not displayed as much during the show to this point, where he has largely been the passive one, the one who is moved by others, whether it's the adults or 02 herself. Young Hiro, though, he is a man who knows how to take initiative. He climbs the tree at great peril. He injured his hands in doing so. He's stolen something heavy to aid him, and he breaks the glass. A willingness not just to suffer harm himself, but to externalize that destruction in order to reach her. This encounter is quite dramatic. It's really some of the best mood setting they've done. Having the sound of wind rush in behind the broken barrier, then having him beckon to her, a lifeline out of that room, and framed by the blinding snow. It's even literally a light fixture he uses to break through. He's quite literally bringing light into the shadows she hides in. And he says to her, "I can get you out of here." We've heard that before, you know. In episode 3, just after he's trying to rename her, she says this to him. The moment hangs for just a bit before wind springs up indoors, somehow, breaking the spell, and she plays it off. Do you think she was trying to see if he remembered? Do you think she fully remembered? Back in the memory, Hiro attempts to explain his actions. He may not understand anything, but she smiled back then, referring to when he saw her clutching the book, and that made her shine brightly in his eyes. There's lots of questions he isn't getting answers for, but this girl is the question he most wants answered, and is the answer he is least likely to get from the adults. Of course he comes in person. The music swells as she sees him, really sees him, and the naked emotion on his face. Now she's the one who is curious, and his face reflected in her eyes has all the gravity of a destiny unfolding. The symbolic snow that has never reached so close falls around her as she crawls into the light. They tentatively join hands for the first time and plunge into danger. And the ground. Once again, a shining white feather floats down. Maybe this one is for her. The impact of the ground was less kind to Hiro, or else 02 healed much faster, and this necessitates her taking over as narrator as she attempts to drag him with her and flee. Despite how little she understands at this point, it's telling that she takes him too. It's much easier to escape if she was only looking out for herself, yeah? Or just instinctively running and hiding, indifferent to the stranger's fate? But despite how confused she is, how everything around her was unfamiliar, she still brings him along. Despite how she's been treated by the other humans she knows, she doesn't leave him behind. She puts herself in discomfort and danger for someone else. This is somewhat different from the current 02, right? We know that these events and their ultimate conclusion knocked Hiro from the trajectory he would have had otherwise, the charismatic and curious leader that everyone respected. Is this a glimpse of the trajectory that 02 was knocked from? Is her callous, disdainful, and violent current persona a deviation from who she would have been if they'd never separated? Anyway, her curiosity and bewilderment get the better of her, as does her more beast-like nature, and she makes some new friends into dinner. Or she would, if Hiro didn't awake to interfere. I think this is a bit of a callback to what we thought was their first meeting, when she bursts up out of the pond with a fish in her mouth. Thus, one of Hiro's first images of her, both times, is that of a predator. The first thing he does upon waking, though, is to try to get her to spit it out, to not be that more bestial thing. Compare that to their first encounter, as they stare each other down, and she spits the fish out of her own accord. Was she remembering this, you think? By the way, go listen to that scene in episode 1 again, and tell me that the music playing over it doesn't sound like it would fit as the soundtrack to a fairy tale. Now, when he actually seems to be reaching for her, looming over her, she acts reflexively, defensively. He is behaving the way the humans who have hurt her behave. You can even see her irises shrink down as she switches to being more aggressive. But as he pats her head, she remembers the kindness of the first person. Her irises expand back out, and she releases him. Somehow, she then understands that she hurt him, and she is ashamed. She's guilty. Young her sees the two of them as of a kind, has empathy despite all she's been through, even understands fault at causing harm. But from this, he gleans that she is nonverbal, that she may not understand anything that he's actually saying. That doesn't stop him from talking to her, of course, and as they move on, he introduces himself and tries to find out more about her. The detail of her bare feet lead him to discovering her collar and code number. Of course, his first instinct is to try to name her from those digits. He tries Oni, then 02, but doesn't think that's very good. And yet, she seizes on it, trying to repeat it to him. Failing adorably, sure, but as near as we can tell, her first words ever are an attempt to speak the name that Hiro gives her. We then have a montage of their adventures together, 02 narrating over the top and explaining that she didn't understand his words, but his voice still called to her. There's several images here of them being companions, but I think we should take particular note of this one, with the mistletoe in the foreground. The lone green thing in winter, holding the promise of life for the time after the snows, and below it, two unlikely companions who may indeed hold a similar promise for the world they will one day inhabit. After the fun of their adventures, they are taking a rest near felled logs. Hiro offers her one of the candies, something I think he specifically held onto in hopes of sharing with her. She doesn't understand that it's food, so in order to get her to try it, he has her say, "Ah," before popping the sweet thing in her mouth. This should also seem familiar to us. Small wonder she loves sweet things, A child loving a sweet thing is pretty endearing, but to step it up even further, 02 then decides she wants to share with him as well. share the only thing she has of any value. She's even reluctant for a moment, weighing the decision, meaning this was not impulsive. She knew she was risking this precious treasure of hers by letting someone else touch it. He begins to read it, but they are cut off by the sound of their pursuit. They hide, and 02 is shaking in terror. Her irises have once again shrunk way down as she retracts into her more instinctual, animal self. He assumes he will be able to talk them down and tries to reassure her. He's accustomed to special treatment, after all, but finding out that they will kill him if necessary makes the danger real for him as well, and it's his turn to shake with terror. Despite this, he still tells her not to worry. He will protect her. They flee, and Hiro takes over narrating since she can't read the story. Like I said, I will deal with the picture book story in a section by itself at the end of this video, so we will kind of skip going into it here. Behind his shortened version of the story, we see the two of them fleeing, attempting to evade capture and being pursued in turn. Snow changes to symbolize death instead for this part of our journey, and the knowledge that the stakes are higher subdues their happiness into anxiety. They take a rest under a rather conspicuous tree, and Hiro is remarking on how sad the story in her book is. He wonders if the two characters could be together if they were both human, and then tries to explain that concept to 02. He seems to notice the parallels between the story and the two of them, but doesn't elaborate, instead trying to get them up and moving again. But 02 is hurt. It's odd, don't you think, that she hasn't instantly healed like we've seen before? No doubt that hints at some kind of change. Faced with her wound, though, Hiro does something kind of extraordinary. Licking anyone's bleeding skin would normally give one pause, never mind if their blood was as alien as hers. But if anything, Hiro is more worried that he might be hurting her, asking her to endure it as he tries to explain why he's doing it. 02 notices the similarity between their positioning and the prince in the book proposing to the princess, and tries to ask if they are the same. Though she's trying to ask if them looking the same means they are the same, she's actually asking with words if what he's doing constitutes love. Well, I don't know. What do you think? Hiro certainly interprets it this way, and seems resolved to be together with her once they get out of here. He then says he'll be her something. I think it's implied that he says darling, right? But why cut it off? Why is that an unrecoverable part of this memory? And more importantly, why does she react the way she does? Whatever it is he says, she recognizes it. In spite of how little she understands or even remembers, she's immediately overcome with emotion. Does this word, darling or not, connect somehow with the mother stand-in from before? Or from the memories before that nursery room that she's lost? I feel like it has to be something like that, right? We don't know, and as she steps in to narrate again, 02 tells us that she doesn't know either, but she thinks they were tears of joy. Hiro notices that they are under a tree full of mistletoe, the holy tree, and as they look up at the sight, 02 continues. She tells us that the picture book's world was pretty, and she believed that she could be that way too if she was with him. Once again, we get the holding of hands, her reaching and hesitating, but with Hiro reaching across with certainty. That's really an accurate reflection of the two of them right now. But that wouldn't be allowed. It seems the significance of the oak and its mistletoe to each of them is that it's the last place they were together. As in the beginning, the two narrators begin to intercut with one another, turning it again into a conversation as they each wrestle with the things that conspire to keep them apart. Is he unable to find the answers because he's a child? Because he doesn't have the power to protect anyone? Is she unable to stay with him because they are different creatures, with blood of different colors? Because she's a monster? It appears the adults intend to erase their memories, and we see flashes of events from the following days as they are being scrubbed away. Dr. Franxx is presiding over their memory wipe, telling them that it's what they get for forgetting their children. As the memories flee, the two as narrator attempts to call to one another to no avail. We see remarks that Hiro is an interesting specimen, which probably saves him from being thrown away. We see Mitsuru's betrayal, alongside Ichigo asking if he's not going to give names anymore. And we see the final page of the picture book that we'll talk about later, and the book appears to be abandoned in the snow, wrinkled along with two black feathers. Finally, an image of blood, half blue and half red, the two merging and changing in the middle. Over this last image, 02 finishes narrating the sequence, letting us know that this is why she swore she'd become human no matter what she had to do. She would turn her blood from blue to red, like his, somehow. And as we know, much blood will be spilled in this pursuit. But despite the hard image she projects, when we see her this time reaching to choke him, she seems less like the menacing red demon of last episode, but rather someone regretfully doing what she must. Then, shocking us back into the present, Ichigo attacks Strelitzia to try to break the link. She loses Delphinium's hand in the process, and if the link is what we think it is, it means she felt like she lost her hand in order to save Hiro. The pain is probably what is causing the connection problem indicated by the blue and orange X's flashing all over Delphinium. She holds on though, and tries to warn Hiro that he is going to be devoured. The doubt that 9 Alpha sowed in her mind has sprung forth, and it seems he was not misleading her, as 02 herself starts to own up to the action. I think she starts to say that it's because she's a monster, that even this terrible attempt on his life comes from her deep self-loathing at being a different creature from the boy in her youth. But now, he remembers. And by remembering, it may be that he is now, in truth, that boy again. It's unclear how much of her own memories were wiped during the process, as she clearly kept a memory of her darling from back then. Maybe she has blank places as well, which is what led us to this point. And maybe now, she too has her memory filled in. For, as the final text card tells us, this is also a story of reunion. Yes, they are now reunited to each other, knowing truly who the other is, but perhaps this is also a reunion between them and the younger versions of themselves, the ones that thought nothing of striking out into wilderness alone if it meant they could be together. However will the world deal with those versions of Hiro and 02, especially if they're united? So like I said, no goals or conflicts today. We could probably assume that 02's goal of meeting her darling from back then is complete, but due to something I'll talk about in the picture book section, this may not be as sure as we think. That same section might introduce a new conflict, but again, we'll visit it then. Let's move right into theme. We'll start with the obvious power of names. We definitely got our biggest confirmation that this story recognizes the humanizing importance of naming. We talked a lot about how important Hiro's naming of his fellow children was during the walkthrough, as well as how immediately Ichigo realized its value as well. Their conversation actually plays nicely with our individuality themes, putting the uniqueness of names against the opposing forces of collectivism and conformity. Ichigo starts out upset at being different, but once given a name, embraces and finds comfort in this uniqueness. The others, once named, come back to their own humanity, and given individuality in even a small way, they embrace it, they internalize it. Likewise, the name he gives 02, even though he realizes it's inadequate, appears to be the first words she ever tried to speak, the very beginning of becoming more human. As near as we can tell, she's progressively become more human-like ever since, up until about episode 8 or so, and it all started with a name from the one who treated her like an equal. There's a reversal of sorts in this theme as well. Hiro apparently stopped giving out names after the memory wipe incident, as we learn from an easy-to-miss line from Ichigo. Considering how different his attitude seems to be after the memory loss, it appears that the giving of names wasn't just important to the people Hiro named, but it was important to him as well. Ceasing to do so signals a loss of some part of himself. This might mean that it will be important for Hiro to give names out once again, something I'll explore a bit in speculation. Additionally, I want to mention our good friend the Golden Bow in regards to this theme. That book contains several examples of cultures that believe that names are literally power. You are careful who you give your name to because it gives them influence over you. Some cultures had secret names and daily use names, while some others believed using their name was fine, but you couldn't speak it yourself. Someone had to do it for you. And some thought that this was the principal way that sorcerers or trickster spirits could work mischief upon you. This more mystical idea of the power of names is another thing, like sympathetic magic, that frequently shows up in modern fantasy stories and their magic systems. Finally, it's clear that our society is also aware of the power of names and actively suppresses it. The parasites, and probably adults too, don't have code numbers as some kind of oversight. The caretaker's interference in the naming game means that this is calculated, it's intentional. It's really just another permutation of the tension between individual and society. Speaking of individual versus society, young Hiro in this episode is basically this theme incarnate. His natural curiosity puts him at odds with the authorities, and he discovers that it separates him from his peers as well. Rather than change in a way that helps him be less different, as Ichigo first suggests for herself, he instead spreads his brand of individuality to others. The adults take notice, and it's clear they consider his sensitivity a threat, a deviation from the norm. Dr. Franxx, who probably has a rather strong streak of individuality himself, is the one who stops the initial conflict with society from affecting Hiro directly. But Hiro does not stop with the naming only. When his trio encounters another disappeared child, Hiro wants to do something about it. He wants to take action. Ichigo and Goro are compliant though, and so Hiro exists alone in this desire to change the society he's subject to. Once he sees what they are doing to 02, however, his desire changes into action, and he breaks all sorts of rules to spring the two of them from Garden. If he can't change the society, he'll simply leave it. But of course, the society can push back. Hiro fought the law, and the law won. Not only did they undo his work to abscond with 02, they erased his memories and rendered him more compliant, less of an individual. Individual versus society theme isn't really supposed to be like an ongoing boxing match, but round 1 definitely went to the society. Of course, now that Hiro has his memories back, let's continue discussing the change in Hiro by looking again at our red Oni, blue Oni characterization trope that we talked about last time. You see, I think Hiro himself embodies the red-blue Oni character pairing. Young him was red Oni, outgoing, charismatic, defiant, but current him is blue Oni, compliant, even-keeled, and withdrawn. In a way, 02 has been carrying on his original spirit. She was largely reactionary and animal-like before him, and cowering and uncertain, a victim. Somewhere along the line, she became like the hero of old instead, hot-blooded, defying authority, and passionate. And interestingly, Hiro has most exhibited these same characteristics whenever she's around. There's actually a curious parallel going on with Ichigo too. I had commented before that Ichigo almost seemed like she was carrying on for Hiro as leader in his stead, that since he couldn't do it, she wasn't going to let just anyone lead. As we see more of Ichigo's past, we can start to see that she has a little bit of that red-blue Oni character pairing between her own past and present. She doesn't exhibit all the traits, but the Ichigo who is crying over being different and defaults to being a follower to Hiro is very different from the Ichigo that we see in the present, one who largely excels in the role of being leader. Current Ichigo will be confrontational and curious if it's something she thinks is important, just like the old Hiro. She only seems to blanch from confrontation when it concerns 02, and she only seems to lose her composure when it concerns Hiro. So in an odd way, it's like the two women closest to Hiro are each carrying on some part of the self that he lost back then. If he starts to become more like his old self, which I fully believe he will, I think it's reasonable to expect some changes in both Ichigo and 02 to go along with this. And that might lead to death and rebirth. We actually still can't quite talk about this theme and its application that started last episode. They have stretched a potentially critical moment on into the 14th episode, which is totally fine, but it means we'll still need to wait on some updates to this theme. We can hopefully incorporate everything from 12, 13, and 14 into this thematic idea's resurgence. Now, we can see that Hiro has already had at least 2 of these already. We talked before about his almost literal death and rebirth in episode 6, but in this episode we see that he had something similar in his youth, where the tampering of his memories led to a death of the charismatic red Oni Hiro, and a rebirth into the passive and struggling one that we've known most of the time. I am anticipating we will have a third one next time if he is indeed reunited to his memories. This might also be going on with 02, though we don't know for certain when she started to change from the young one that we met today into the one who showed up at Plantation 13 back in episode 1. However, she has the same potential to be reborn next time just by being reunited to her darling. Of course, that may not be the only change coming. Now I know there were other thematic elements at play today besides what's up here, but I have touched on some already, and some more come up in these next two sections, so let's move on to speculation. So, we were wrong about him naming her Honey, and about the naming being the thing that snaps her out of it. This is one of those where if we'd known she was nonverbal, we might have approached it differently. It's a shame, really. He did name her, as we guessed, but it was the 02 name, and it was largely an accident. I talked in theme about the power of names and how critical the name might have been to her development into her more human mindset. I want now to add some new wrinkle to this speculation. He's not done naming her. We saw that past him thought it wasn't a very good name. Current him commented on her name being too much like her code number. We understand now why 02 would be resistant to him changing it, something we were sort of right about, even if we guessed the actual naming scene wrong. I now think that some other name will be given to replace 02. It may actually even be the Honey name, though we're going to need to wait on the origin of Darling before we go all in on that. He's not content with her name, even if she is. But once she knows he's the darling that named her originally, she will likely be more receptive to a change. In fact, we might even get our Honey and Darling pairing for the same reason I proposed, just in reverse, that she should have a term of endearment just like he does. If she does, it might share some thematic overlap with death and rebirth, signaling an important moment like we originally guessed at the beginning. At least we were right about him suggesting Oni at first. No humorous reaction though, since she probably didn't understand what that meant at all. Oh well. Maybe he'll do it again if he does try to rename her. I also think it's a shame that he didn't share the Jinn Bird story with her. Instead, the story they share is the Beast and the Prince story. I would much rather it have been the Jinn Bird tale, because as we'll see in the next section, having the picture book as their shared story has some ominous implications. Next up, let's talk about the very beginning of the show, because we need to re-examine that scene now. As she's giving us the opening narration about the Jinn Bird, she's approaching the oak with the mistletoe. However, she is alone. Is this her returning to the tree after Hiro has been taken away? It doesn't seem like the kind of thing they would allow normally, right? But she does look down at her thumb, which is bleeding blue blood, and her reaction is to sigh. Now, we had no context for this at the beginning, but now, doesn't it seem likely that seeing the color of her blood reminds her of being different from Hiro? That she is sighing because of still having blue blood? So then, what if she was actually allowed to go there now and again, probably out of some slim hope of running into him? She spoke her first words while being around Hiro. Is it possible she began to change towards humanity even further, and this fascinated Dr. Franxx? Maybe this caused him to take personal interest in her, changing what they did with her, encouraging her humanity, and this included giving her leave to explore the grounds. Perhaps she is in the process of changing toward humanity when we see her here, and seeing that she is still blue-blooded makes her sigh because she still has a long way to go. But if this is so, what then does it mean that she looks back to see all those Klaxosaurs? Let's not forget Hachi's statement last episode about how Klaxosaurs had never been seen in this area before. Should we assume that this is much more like a dream than an actual event then? I mean, the following scene with her in Plantation 13 seems like a dream, so this isn't that much of a stretch. If that's so, then maybe the tree where she was last with Hiro represents one future, and the Klaxosaur community on the other side of her represents another. The two tensions inside of her, the two possible futures she has, to be rejoined to Hiro, or to turn more and more into a Klaxosaur. I don't know exactly, but I will speculate that Hiro's impact on 02 changed the way Dr. Franxx interacted with her from then on. After all, we saw back in episode 1 and 7 that the two of them were on pretty good terms. I can't imagine that would be the case if he continued to do the things to her we saw this time. Finally, I want to return to our original question from the opening. Did 02 in the present recognize Hiro? I showed the 2 times where something he said to her during their time together are things she's repeated to him after they ran into each other again. There's actually a third one in the text of the Beast and the Prince story. We'll talk about that at length in the next bit, but I'll show you just the line I mean right here at the end of one of the pages. The princess took the prince's hand and said with a smile on her face, "Grab onto me and never let go, 7 asterisks." Well, that's an odd name for a prince. Maybe his name is Hunter too. Actually, this is just a callback to the oddly interrupted word that Hiro uses, that we are assuming is darling, but you never know. Either way, when 02 uses this line at the end of episode 8, she definitely says darling. So, this is what we have. We know that 02 had some of her memories erased alongside Hiro, but she clearly remembers a lot more of this than he does. Not only because she has this driving need to meet the darling from back then, but also because she remembers the picture book and is still searching for it. And she narrates in the memories that she never forgot things like how vast the sky was, or how his voice reached to her despite not knowing his words. And of course, she remembers the red blood. These indicate that she has whole memories from several parts of their encounter. It's possible she remembers all of it, though we don't know that. But does she think current Hiro is that darling? I mean, she does seem to throw hints at him. Her first words suggest that her sense of smell recognizes him, and her words at the end of the first episode are about finding him. Likewise, she starts off pretty obsessive with him, looking at him with desire early in episode 2, and certain that he wouldn't be okay with her piloting with another in episode 3. But somewhere along the way, it seems she has doubts. Or maybe she started out that way and played it safe, trying to indicate who she was to him. After all, she looks much different, right? Can't really expect him to recognize her right away, horns or not, but he doesn't. She gives him the 02 name and it doesn't ring a bell. He even tries to change it later on. He insists on her piloting with Mitsuru, something she didn't expect. Things seem better by the end of the 4th episode, and even though he's in peril heading into the target beta fight, he pulls through. They seem their happiest in 7 and 8, but perhaps sometime in 9 is when she started to notice she was changing. How could she be turning less human when the whole point of becoming human was to be with her darling? How could this guy be her darling then if she's turning back into a beast? Somewhere in all this, she's second-guessed herself. She doubted Hiro was her darling. All those little things that didn't add up early on come back with a vengeance. So she decides she was mistaken, and worse, she's now getting further away from meeting her true darling. And that means that this guy, Hiro, is in the way. And as we know, she is not going to let anything stand between her and the boy from her youth. Alternatively, she knew from the beginning that he wasn't the real darling, or she knew that he had no memory of her and so might as well not be. But he's certainly close enough, and he excites her, so he becomes a kind of replacement goldfish for the darling she really wants. When she's optimistic, she can project all that she wants onto him, and once they can pilot together and have their moments, all is well. But she remains outside the circle. She remains apart, and she knows all along that she's still actually a monster. So on her more pessimistic days, she's not content with the charade. He is not a suitable replacement. Once she decides in her desperation that she must choose between him and pursuing the original darling, well, Hiro has no chance. She's not even listening anymore and mocks his heartfelt confession. Who cares what he says or wants? He's no darling to her. After all, she has a fear guiding her. A fear she inherited from the story in the picture book. So, let's talk about this picture book, as it looks like the key thing connecting 02 to her past darling. We get a new end credits, this time laying out the entire text of the book for us. We're not going to line by line these, but I will have them play over here for a bit while we talk, at a slower pace than they do in the actual episode. This story of the Prince and the Beast reminds me very strongly of another fairy tale, The Little Mermaid. Not the Disney-fied version, but Hans Christian Andersen's original, far more depressing story. The parallels are so strong that it's hard to believe it wasn't the inspiration for our picture book story. Little Mermaid is a very familiar story in Japan, and has inspired and influenced at least a half a dozen anime already. So by examining the ways in which they are similar, we probably will zero in on which parts are important. Call it convergent storytelling if you wish. Now, I won't run through the whole thing, but The Little Mermaid has a lot of overlap that I will mention. A non-human girl falls for a human boy, meeting him the first time she's able to venture outside her closed environment. In order to reach the human boy, the girl makes a deal with a witch to become human. In each case, there is a catch and a price. She must give up some part of herself. Doing so causes her great pain, but the pain is nothing besides the joy she feels at becoming human. However, the part she loses, wings and fishtail, mean that she cannot return to the realms from whence she came. This doesn't matter to her at first, as she is able to be with the boy for a time, and they are happy together. But ultimately, she is unable to stay with him, and so another transformation takes place, one that she doesn't want. She won't change back into what she once was, but something else. She can save herself from this change, but to do so, she must destroy the boy she loves. Though she considers at first, she ultimately chooses her own downfall rather than harming the boy, but it still means that they will be separated. Now, I'm not going to claim that these are perfect parallels. The endings are a bit different, as in the Prince and Beast story, the prince realizes what he's lost and searches for her, while in The Little Mermaid, the prince marries someone else, and the mermaid herself gets a form of redemption in becoming a daughter of the air rather than sea foam. The point, though, is both end with the two estranged forever, and in both cases, it's because of the princess turning into something non-human. It's also common in both that the princesses can stop their fate as long as she's willing to harm the prince, but when it comes down to it, she won't go through with it. Since Hero's summation did not include the end of the tale, let's go over that briefly. The witch had warned the Beast Princess that no matter how she may look, she is still a beast and will one day consume the prince's life. One night, after they have been married and happy together, she wakes to find herself transforming into a beast. Not just any beast, but an ugly beast instead of the beautiful one she was, with black wings instead of the ashen ones she originally had. But if she kills the one she loves, she can at least turn back into her original form. The temptation to kill him nearly overwhelms her, and she reaches for his throat, but instead she kisses him on the cheek and departs. The prince later wakes and she is gone, leaving jet black feathers all over the bed. He set out to search everywhere for her, but no one had seen her. How many parallels do you think we have between these stories and Darling in the Franxx? Certainly our current moment, with 02 choking Hero out as she threatens to change, fits the climax of each story. If we follow the pattern, she should ultimately choose not to harm him, but with the consequence that she continues her transformation and they are therefore separated. Is that the future that is implied here? Will we end this episode with them realizing they've found one another, only to begin next time by having the sorification process continue anyway? If the story pattern is followed, this won't be her turning back into the red-skinned girl either, but into some third thing, different from her past or current self. And then there's the similarities with the past. Meeting a human boy while she is still non-human and loving him is pretty spot on. Does this mean that after their separation, 02 then made some metaphorical deal with a witch to become as human as she has? I feel like Dr. Franxx becomes a witch in this metaphor. But what part of herself did she have to give up? The Little Mermaid gives up her voice, and the Beast Princess gives up her wings. But did the version of 02 we saw even have anything she could give up? She lost her red skin and her blue blood, and almost lost her horns, but did she care about any of these things? I mean, it seems like her healing factor has slowed down considerably, but it still must be present because Hero remarks on how quickly she heals at one point. Was there anything in her world she valued at all? Anything she would hate to lose? The only thing I can think of is this. I have no idea why Dr. Franxx would demand she turn over the picture book to him in exchange for whatever process has turned her into the near-human thing she is, but something like that would fit the pattern. Maybe it's to guarantee her good behavior? Maybe it's the only leverage they have over her? You may wonder why I bother comparing the story of The Little Mermaid at all, considering we have a full-blown fairy tale here to draw parallels with. Well, I wanted to show you the weight of pattern here because it doesn't stop there. This whole story also has a parallel with the Red and Blue Oni story. Though they're friends rather than lovers, the result is the same. Permanent separation as a result of one choosing the good of the other. Then there's the reference to a non-specific Shakespearean tragedy. I mentioned that there are 3 such tragedies that follow that name pattern: Romeo and Juliet, Antony and Cleopatra, and Troilus and Cressida. They aren't just about two lovers who are together for a time but ultimately can't be together. They are also all about two lovers who belong to different opposing groups: Capulets and Montagues, Romans and Egyptians, Trojans and Greeks, Klaxosaurs and humans. And finally, just for fun, add in the reference to the golden bow and its repeated stories of sacrifice for the good of the world. Then remember that 9 Alpha referred to 02 as the key to saving the world. Anyone see a pattern here? Anyone suspect we're watching a tragedy? Happily Ever After seems less and less like it's in the cards. Oh wait, there's actually more. Plantation 13's actual name is Karasus. Something I pointed out back in episode 2 is a plant name that is probably a reference to cherry blossoms. Remember everything I said about cherry blossoms and their enduring symbolic importance in Japanese art? One of the key features of this is the beauty of transient things. Things whose beauty comes in part from being so temporary, so fleeting. Well, that is the beauty part in The Beast and the Prince, the brief time they are together before she must flee. Likewise in The Little Mermaid, before he mistakenly marries the wrong savior. Likewise in the Red Blue Oni story, when Red has won over the children, but not yet learned that Blue has departed. Even in the Shakespearean tragedies, there is a time before the end where the lovers have overcome great odds to be together. But in all of them, the victory is short-lived, the joy ephemeral. They are all the more beautiful and striking for their brevity, but inevitably they disappear, like blossoms blown away by the wind. This is what I meant when I said we might have a new conflict. If all these story patterns hold, 02 and Hiro may achieve a happy togetherness, but a day of reckoning looms over them. But I don't want to leave you with nothing, for our picture book gave us one slim hope. It says that no matter how she disguises herself, she is still a beast. And it also says a beast and a human could never be together. Hiro himself remarks on this, asking if it's because one of them isn't human that they can't get married. And then later he thinks, if they were both human, before 02 gives her ridiculously cute grin, it may be this is even where she got the idea. If she was human and not a beast, they could be together. But the story says, no matter how she changes her looks, whether she gives up her ashen wings, or her mermaid's tail, or her red skin, she is still a beast. She can't be human, she can only look that way. You know what happens right after this? Hiro takes some of her blood into himself. This is the way out. He did it out of empathy. It was an incredible act of looking past her monstrosity. You see, she looked at his blood at the end, sees it as red, and thinks, we are not the same thing. He looks at her blue blood and thought, we are not the same thing, but that doesn't matter. A human and a beast can't be together, fine. But what about two beasts? I don't see any prohibition in these stories. In all those tales we just went through, the one thing that never happens is having the other person go whip up a deal of their own. And maybe Hiro did just that, just now. Accidentally, sure, but out of an act of unselfish and unflinching love. He has her blood in him. Maybe that is why they can pilot together. Maybe it's why he washes out with anyone else. Maybe it's why his yellow blood cells did the exact opposite thing as everyone else. Maybe it's why they are both becoming less human as they stay together, and maybe that's okay. The story gives us one other reason to hope. The thing the Beast Princess gives up are her beautiful ashen wings. She can never fly again, a price she's willing to pay. Well, anyone remember Hiro's new driving goal?
君の翼でありたい.
Furthermore, the wings in the story are ashen, in other words, gray. Isn't gray somewhere between the black feathers of the Beast Princess who flees and the white feathers of the Jinn birds that open the entire show? Is this really just happenstance? To throw one more wrinkle into all this, I think it's possible that the story can apply in reverse. That is, we can switch the roles and make Hiro the princess. After all, he is the one who sees her first, in secret, and has love bloom in his heart before she is even aware of him. He has to give something up to reach her. He breaks the rules and surrenders his privileged place and garden. After all, the teen codes seem to be treated with a reverence not unlike royalty. He's much like the Beast Princess in that regard. In the story, The pivotal moment that turns the prince towards loving the beast is that she sucks the poison out of a snake bite on his leg. That seems an awful lot like Hiro's attention to Zero Two's wound, no? He even proposes to her at that moment in the story, just as Zero Two is inadvertently doing in this story. They do get to be happy together for a time, but it is fleeting, just like the stories. And Hiro, after his memories are taken, changes into something that is not the same as he was before, just like the Beast Princess and her black wings. It even shows the storybook at the end with black feathers over it, just like the prince's bed in the story after the Beast Princess has fled. What does all that mean? Well, I don't know yet. They could actually run both stories if they're clever enough. I suspect that the first few minutes of the next episode will be rather enlightening on this matter, so we will visit this anew next time. I do have a few final thoughts. There's still a lot we don't know, especially how the picture book parallels may play out in the short or long term. But you know what my biggest takeaway from this episode is? The Ape Council? They are so screwed. Look, up until now, they've been dealing with this version of Hiro, compliant and passive, and this version, who believes in the purpose that Papa has given him. His handlers have even hoped he would tame Zero Two to make her more cooperative, to make her more like him. Now though, now that he remembers the things they did to her, the things they did to him, and most importantly, the way he used to be, now they're going to get this Hiro, defiant despite facing something larger than himself, curious and unyielding in pursuit of answers, and with no regard at all for the barriers they place before him. Maybe they would have been safe normally. They can certainly deal with one obstinate child, but they spent all this time and effort crafting a perfect weapon, limited only by her inability to find a sustainable partner. They hoped Hiro would be the one who sheathes her. Instead, he's going to be the one who wields her. In fact, it was probably all over for Ape the moment this happened.
大丈夫。僕は君を守るから。
The Priest King's days are numbered.